The glass didn't shatter when Admiral Okafor stood up. Everything else did. I watched a 74-year-old man push back his chair. Slowly, deliberately, the way men move when they've decided something matters. And I thought, don't. Please, not here, not tonight. He looked at me across that long table with its ivory candles and Robert's expensive wine, and he said 4 words. 4 words that took 15 years to earn. I couldn't stop what happened next. The room shifted. Captain Teller rose beside him. And my father-in-law, the man who had called me nobody for 11 years, went very, very quiet. Before I tell you how we got there, what city and what time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. A few hours earlier, I was standing in the upstairs bathroom of the Hughes family home, running cold water over my wrists, staring at a woman in the mirror I barely recognized. Not because of the dress. The dress was fine. Navy blue, simple cut, nothing that would draw attention. I'd chosen it for exactly that reason. I choose most things for exactly that reason. It was the expression on her face. On my face. That particular kind of tired that doesn't come from not sleeping. It comes from years of deciding over and over again that keeping the peace is worth the cost. That the people who love you, really love you, the ones who matter, are worth protecting from the truth, even when the truth is the most impressive thing about you. I was 43 years old. I had spent 21 of those years serving a country that most of the people downstairs had never thought about except on holidays. I had been in rooms where the wrong word meant someone died. I had made calls, the kind you don't put in reports, the kind that live in the back of your throat forever. And I had lived with them, quietly, the way you live with scar tissue. You don't show people your scars at dinner parties. You just move carefully around the furniture. Daniel knocked on the door at 6:14. Pris, his voice was gentle the way it gets when he's apologizing for something that hasn't happened yet. They're starting the champagne toast. I'll be right down. A pause. I could hear him breathing through the door. He's not going to say anything tonight, Daniel said. I talked to him this morning. He promised. I looked at myself in the mirror. I thought about all the promises Robert Hughes had made over 11 years. The Thanksgiving he swore he wouldn't bring up Daniel's ex-girlfriend, who had a law degree and a trust fund, and apparently, in Robert's accounting, represented everything a daughter-in-law should be. The Christmas he promised Margaret he'd be civil, and spent the evening asking me, in front of 7 relatives, whether I'd ever considered doing something more visible with my career. Okay, I said. Because what else do you say? I turned off the faucet. I dried my hands on the white guest towel. The good ones Margaret puts out only for company, monogrammed, ironed into perfect thirds. I straightened the small gold stud in my left ear, regulation size, force of habit, and I went downstairs. The Hughes home is the kind of house that announces itself. Red brick colonial, 4 white columns out front, a circular driveway with a fountain that Robert had installed in 2019 because, as he told Daniel, a man's home should reflect what he's built. Inside, crown molding, oil paintings of ships that Robert had never sailed on, a dining room that seated 24. Tonight it seated 42, with round tables set up in the garden, and the overflow spilling onto the stone terrace, 60 people, give or take, business partners, old college friends, 2 city councilmen, the pastor from Robert's church, neighbors, and Admiral Frank Okafor. I noticed him the moment I stepped onto the terrace, though I didn't know who he was yet. He was standing near the rose garden with a glass of sparkling water, not champagne, I noticed, talking to no one in particular, watching the crowd with the quiet attention of a man who has spent a lifetime reading rooms. 70-something. Silver at his temples. The posture. You always notice the posture. Some things don't leave you just because you hang up the uniform. I filed him away the way I file everything. Force of habit. Lily found me before I found Daniel. She came running from the direction of the children's table. Margaret had set one up near the hedgerow, a mercy, her dark hair coming loose from its braid, a smear of something pink near her collar. Mom, She grabbed my hand with both of hers, which she still does sometimes, which I hope she never stops doing. Grandpa Robert has a boat now. He showed me a picture. He said it's 40 feet. That's a big boat. He said Uncle Brandon helped him pick it out. She looked up at me. Her eyes are Daniel's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looks different in every light. Did you know about the boat? I did not know about the boat. Do you think we'll get to ride on it? I squeezed her hand. Maybe. She seemed satisfied with that and ran back toward the children's table. I watched her go and felt the thing I always feel watching her in spaces like this. It's that specific mix of love and vigilance. The need to protect her from the undertow of this family without letting her feel the current. Daniel appeared at my elbow with a glass of white wine I hadn't asked for. You look beautiful, he said. You look nervous, he laughed, which was the right response. Then, Dad cornered me near the bar. He wants to introduce you to Captain Teller tonight. Apparently, Teller's base is adjacent to some property Dad is looking at for a development deal. He thinks, Daniel stopped, ran a hand through his hair. He thinks you might have, quote, useful government contacts. I looked at my husband 11 years of marriage. He is a good man. I want to be clear about that, because what comes later in this story could make you doubt it, and you shouldn't. Daniel Hughes is a genuinely good man who loves me as completely as a person can love someone they only partially know. The partial knowing is not his fault. It is mine. The choices about what to share and what to protect have always been mine, and I made them with the best intentions. And I am still not certain I was right. Of course he does, I said. Daniel touched my arm. Pris, it's fine. I took a small sip of wine. I'll be gracious. I'm always gracious. He looked at me for a moment, that look he has, the one that sees further than I sometimes want to be seen, and then he nodded. And we walked together into the party, into the warm September evening, into the long familiar performance of being the daughter-in-law. Robert Hughes had always wished his son hadn't chosen. I had done this before. I knew the choreography. Smile at Margaret's friends. Compliment the centerpieces. Dahlia's very nice. Accept the polite questions about my job with the same answer I always give, delivered warmly. Oh, government work. Mostly administrative. Nothing very interesting. Watch the eyes glaze over. Watch the subject change. Become, in the way I have perfected over a decade, someone no one feels the need to look at too closely. I was good at it. I had been good at other things first, but I was good at this too. What I didn't know. What I had no way of knowing as I stood there in Robert Hughes's garden with my glass of untouched wine was that a man with a glass of sparkling water near the rose bushes had spent the last 4 minutes looking at me with an expression I would only understand later. Recognition. Robert Hughes makes an entrance even in his own home. He came through the French doors at 6:45. Margaret on his arm, her silver hair set perfectly, her smiles the practiced warmth of a woman who has spent 50 years being the softer edge of a hard man. And the crowd shifted toward them the way crowds always shift toward people who expect to be the center. Not rushed. Just gravitational. The way certain personalities bend the room without trying. Or rather, while trying very hard and having learned to make it look effortless. He was 72 years old and he looked 65. That was the thing about Robert. He had the particular vitality of men who have never once doubted their own importance. It keeps them young in the worst possible way. There they are, Daniel murmured beside me. I watched Robert work the room. He had a handshake for the councilman, a back pat for his old college roommate, a long, warm embrace for the pastor. And then his eyes found Daniel, and he smiled. Genuinely, I think, because whatever else Robert Hughes is, he loves his son. The love is real. It is just very specific in its shape. It has edges that cut the people adjacent to it. He came to us, kissed Margaret's cheek, gripped Daniel's hand with both of his. There's my boy. Happy anniversary, Dad. 50 years. That's something. 50 years. Robert glanced at Margaret with a look that was, for a moment, almost tender. Your mother kept me honest. Then he looked at me, Priscilla. The way he says my name has always carried a faint note of something I can't quite name. Not dislike, Robert Hughes is too socially skilled for open dislike. More like mild surprise, as though he encounters me at these events and each time registers, fresh, a small disappointment he has made his peace with. You look well, thank you, Robert. Congratulations. 50 years is a real achievement. It is, he nodded, looked past my shoulder toward the garden. Daniel, Captain Teller arrived. I want you to meet him before dinner. He's the base commander up at Whitmore. Good man. Did 25 years. Very well connected. He paused, then added, with the particular casualness that is never casual. Thought maybe Priscilla could come along, since she works with government people. Government people. Daniel made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. I touched his elbow, the lightest pressure, which means it's fine, let it go. Of course, I said. I'd be happy to meet him. Captain Marcus Teller was standing near the drinks table with a glass of iced tea, talking to Brandon. I saw Brandon first. My brother-in-law has the build of a man who played lacrosse in college and has been trying to remain that person ever since. Broad-shouldered and loud in the way that fills a room horizontally rather than vertically. He was laughing at something, his own joke probably, his hand moving in the expansive gesture he uses when he wants people to know he's at ease. Then I saw Teller. The recognition was instantaneous and completely internal. I felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure. Not pain, just a shift, a recalibration. Marcus Teller, Annapolis class of 2000. We had sat 3 rows apart in naval intelligence coursework for 2 semesters. He had called me Hughes the way everyone called me Hughes, which was, in those years, is the highest form of address. Your last name, clean and direct, no softening, no gender, just the name. I had not seen him in 11 years. He had not seen me in 11 years either. I watched his eyes find me across the small distance, watched the same shift happen in him, that micro-expression, a quarter second of adjustment, and then, because Marcus Teller is as trained as I am, nothing. His face returned to the pleasant, steady expression of a base commander at a civilian social event. We did not acknowledge each other. I don't know if Robert noticed. Probably not. Robert notices things that confirm what he already believes, which is a very efficient system, if an incomplete one. Captain Teller. Robert said, I want you to meet my son Daniel. And this is Daniel's wife, Priscilla. She does something or other with the federal government administration. Is it Priscilla? That's right, I said. Administrative work. Brandon glanced over. He had his champagne flute tilted at the angle that meant he was on his third. Still at it, huh, Pris? 15 years of government administration. He said administration the way people say participation trophy. You must really love the filing. Captain Teller shook Daniel's hand. Then mine. His grip was firm and brief and entirely correct. Priscilla, he said. Just my name. Pleasantly. Giving me nothing and taking nothing, Captain. Said Robert was already steering the conversation toward Whitmore Base and the property adjacent to its eastern perimeter, a 40-acre parcel he'd been eyeing for a mixed-use development. I let the conversation move past me. I stood at the edge of it, which is where I have always stood in this family, and I held my wine glass and I watched Marcus Teller listen to my father-in-law with the courteous, noncommittal attention of a man who has sat across from far more difficult people than Robert Hughes. And I felt unexpectedly something close to comfort. Someone in this garden knew what I was. Even if he would never say so. That, it turned out, was enough. For a little while, dinner was served at 7:30. Round tables of 8, cream linens, the dahlias in low arrangements so people could see each other. I was seated between Daniel and a woman named Patricia who sold real estate and wanted me to know it. Lily was at the children's table, visible through the gap in the hedgerow, eating carefully the way she does at formal events, because I have taught her that how you eat in public is a form of communication. Admiral Okafor was 2 tables to my left. I know now that he had been watching me since I came downstairs. At the time, I thought he was simply the kind of man who watches rooms, which is true, he is. And I gave it no further thought. I was managing Patricia's questions about the housing market with the part of my brain that handles social autopilot, and with the other part I was monitoring the table. Daniel's posture, which loosens when he's relaxed and tightens when his father is about to say something. Robert's volume, which had risen with the wine. Brandon's restlessness, his knee probably moving under the table the way it does. It was, in other words, an evening like other evenings, until Robert tapped his fork against his crystal glass. Before the cake, he said, standing, his voice carrying easily over the garden, because Robert Hughes has always known how to fill a space. I want to say something. Margaret touched his hand. Smiled. Robert looked around the table, at Brandon, at Daniel, past me, briefly the way you glance at furniture. Then at his guests. 50 years, he said. 50 years of building something, a business, a family, a name. He paused. Let it land. I've always believed that a man, a person, is defined by what they produce, what they make visible, what they can point to and say, I did that. He raised his glass. And then, because Robert Hughes has never once in his life read a room incorrectly and failed to press the advantage, he looked at me for just a moment, the briefest, most socially deniable moment, and smiled the smile that meant nothing and everything, the smile that said present company and all their invisible work included. I looked back at him. I kept my face very still. And across the garden, I heard the quiet sound of a chair being pulled back from a table. The chair didn't move yet. Not fully. I found out later that Admiral Okafor had started to rise at that moment, at Robert's toast, at that smile, and then stopped himself. Settled back, because he wasn't certain yet. Because 43-year-old women at garden parties in navy blue dresses do not automatically become the people you remember from classified briefings and commendation ceremonies. And Frank Okafor had not survived 74 years, 32 of them in the United States Navy. By acting on first impressions, he was waiting for confirmation. He would get it. But not yet. The cake came at 8:15. 5 tiers, ivory frosting, sugar roses that Margaret had apparently spent 3 weeks selecting from a bakery in Georgetown. It was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when someone has put enormous care into them, and I felt a genuine warmth toward Margaret in that moment. Not complicated, just clean. She had loved this man for 50 years, whatever I thought of Robert Hughes. That was real, and it deserved the 5-tier cake. Lily appeared at my elbow during the cutting, sliding into the space between my chair and Daniel's with the practiced stealth of a child who has learned which adults will shoo her back to the children's table and which will quietly make room. I made room. She leaned against my arm and watched the cake being cut with the focused attention she gives to things she finds genuinely interesting. And I rested my hand on her shoulder, and for a few minutes the evening was simply an evening. Then Brandon sat down. He had migrated during the cake. His own table had apparently exhausted its entertainment value, and pulled an empty chair between his wife Claire and the edge of our table, with the ease of a man who believes all spaces are available to him. Claire followed, carrying both their plates. She gave me a smile that landed somewhere between polite and careful, the expression of a woman navigating a room where she knows the floor plan, but not all the load-bearing walls. Lilybug, Brandon said, pointing at my daughter with his fork. You getting cake? I already had some, Lily said. Smart kid. He cut into his slice. Looked at Daniel. Hey, did Dad tell you about the Whitmore deal? If Teller plays ball, we're talking maybe 60 units, mixed residential and commercial. Could be the biggest thing the company's done in 5 years. Daniel nodded. Careful. He mentioned it. We need the right contacts on the federal side. Environmental clearances, zoning waivers, the whole bureaucratic maze. Brandon waved his fork vaguely in my direction without looking at me. Thought maybe Pris could be useful for once. For once, Lily's shoulder went slightly rigid under my hand. She is 11 years old, and she catches more than people think she does. Children always do, Brandon, Daniel said. Quiet. What? I'm serious. 15 years in federal government, she must know somebody who knows somebody. That's how it works, right, Pris? Isn't that what you people do? You know people? You people. I took a breath. Small and slow. Through the nose, the kind that doesn't show. I'll see what I can do, I said. Brandon looked at me then, really looked at me, which he doesn't always bother to do. There was something in his eyes that wasn't quite contempt, more like genuine puzzlement. As though he found me, after 11 years, still faintly baffling. A woman who never rose to the bait, never performed distress, never gave him the satisfaction of a reaction he could categorize. You know what your problem is, Pris? He leaned back in his chair, the posture of a man who is about to say something he has decided is insight. You're too quiet. In this family, in any family, really, quiet gets you nowhere. People assume quiet means nothing's happening. Some people, I said, are right about that. He laughed. He thought I was agreeing with him. Robert returned to the table at 8:40, flushed with champagne and the specific satisfaction of a man whose party is going well. He pulled out Margaret's chair, sat heavily, looked around at his gathered family with the expansive benevolence of a patriarch in full bloom. Captain Teller had drifted to our table as well, Robert's gravitational field again pulling people into orbit. He sat across from me, slightly to the left, his iced tea long since gone, nursing a water. He had the expression I recognized from 25 years of professional training. Present, attentive, revealing nothing. Admiral Okafor was at the next table. I was aware of him the way you are aware of a particular quality of light. Not looking directly at it, but knowing it's there. Robert picked up his champagne. Teller, he said, I was just telling my son about Whitmore. Hell of an operation you're running up there. Thank you, sir. Good people. Good people. Robert nodded sagely. That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Knowing the right people. Surrounding yourself with substance. He let the word substance settle over the table like a fine dust, coating everything. My son Daniel has an eye for architecture, always has. Knows how to build things that last. A pause. Took him a while to find the right partner in life. But he spread his hands in a gesture of philosophical acceptance. We work with what we have. The table had one of those silences that isn't empty. Daniel's posture had gone rigid beside me. I felt it without looking. Captain Teller's eyes moved to me briefly. Back to Robert, Priscilla, Robert continued, in the tone of a man warming to a subject he finds mildly amusing, has been, what is it now, 15 years? In federal government. Administration, he said it the way Brandon had said it, the exact same weight. I realized they had discussed this at some point in some room I wasn't in. The word had been agreed upon. We've always said she's very dedicated. Very. He reached for his glass. Quiet! Brandon chuckled. Claire studied her cake. Margaret looked at the centerpiece. Daniel said, Dad, I'm paying her a compliment. Robert smiled at me. Generous. Paternal. The smile of a man who believes he is being gracious. Dedicated and quiet. There are worse things. I looked at him. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the Thanksgiving and the Christmas and the 47 other occasions and the particular exhaustion of being someone's idea of a lesser thing. I thought about 2 men who died in a ditch outside Djibouti because someone in a cocktail party said the wrong thing to the wrong person. I thought about 6 months of investigation and the words suspended in a memo I still have in a locked file in my home office. I thought about Lily's shoulder going rigid and something, not anger, not exactly, something quieter and older than anger, shifted in my chest. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, a voice came from the next table. Unhurried. Clear, forgive me, Admiral Okafor said. He wasn't standing yet. He was simply sitting forward in his chair, one hand flat on the white tablecloth, looking at me with an expression I would spend weeks trying to describe, and never quite manage. I've been trying to place you all evening, he said. Hughes, he said my name the way Teller had said it earlier. Clean, direct, just the name. Was your callsign Ghost? The garden went very quiet. Not all at once. In rings, like a stone dropped in still water, the nearest conversations stopping first, then the ones beyond, until the only sounds were the September crickets and the distant clatter of the catering staff and Robert Hughes setting down his champagne glass with a small, precise click. I looked at Admiral Frank Okafor. I thought, don't. Please, not here. And then I thought about Lily. I gave him the smallest nod. He stood up slowly. That's the thing I keep coming back to, even now. The slowness of it. Admiral Frank Okafor did not leap to his feet. He did not make a production. He rose the way men rise when they have decided something is worth rising for, with full weight, full intention, the unhurried movement of someone who has never once in his life needed to perform authority because authority simply lives in him, settled and permanent as bone. He was 74 years old. He had a slight forward lean to his right shoulder. Old injury probably, the kind you carry so long it becomes part of your silhouette. He was wearing a dark jacket over an open collar shirt, no uniform, nothing that announced him. But the posture. Always the posture. The table nearest us had gone silent. The one beyond it followed. The catering staff near the drinks table stopped moving. Robert Hughes was looking at Admiral Okafor with the expression of a man who has just realized he may have miscalculated something but isn't yet certain what. Commander Hughes, Okafor said. Not Priscilla. Not Mrs. Hughes. Not Daniel's wife, or the quiet one, or she does something administrative. Commander Hughes. I heard Daniel make a sound beside me, very small. The sound of a man hearing his wife's name for the first time. I want to make sure I'm not mistaken, Okafor continued, his voice carrying easily across the now silent garden, because it's been some years. But I signed your commendation personally, Operation Nightfall. Djibouti, 2016. He paused. 11 hostages recovered in 72 hours. 0 casualties on our side. Another pause. That was you. It was not a question. I sat very still. Yes, sir, I said. That was my team. Something moved through the garden then. I felt it before I understood it. A change in atmospheric pressure, the way a storm announces itself before the clouds arrive. Robert's hand was flat on the tablecloth. Brandon had stopped chewing. Claire's fork was suspended halfway to her plate. And Captain Marcus Teller, who had been sitting across from me with his water glass and his careful neutral expression for the better part of 2 hours, pushed back his chair. He stood, not slowly the way Okafor had. Teller stood the way officers stand when a superior officer is on their feet and courtesy demands it. Clean and immediate. But he didn't sit back down. He remained standing, and he looked at me. And for the first time all evening, his expression broke open into something unguarded and genuine. Hughes, he said, just that. But the way he said it, the recognition in it, the weight of shared history. 25 years of knowing what that name meant in rooms most people in this garden would never enter. Said everything else. Teller, I said. Robert Hughes looked from Teller to Okafor to me. His mouth had opened slightly. He closed it. He was recalculating. I could see the machinery of it behind his eyes. All the assumptions he had stacked and organized over 11 years being picked up and re-examined one by one. And I felt, for the first time that evening, something I wasn't prepared for. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Exhaustion. A deep oceanic exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hour. Okafor moved around the table. Not hurrying. He stopped beside my chair and extended his hand, and I stood, reflex, training, the body remembering what the mind sometimes tries to soften, and shook it. His grip was firm. His eyes were steady. It is an honor, he said quietly, to be in the same room with you. Behind me, I heard Lily say, Mom? I didn't turn around, not yet. I needed one more second. One more second of standing very still while the world I had carefully constructed around myself rearranged into something I didn't fully recognize. The honor is mine, Admiral, I said. Teller had come around the table as well. He shook my hand next, and there was something in the handshake that was different from the careful, neutral one he'd given me 2 hours ago. This one had apology in it. Not for tonight specifically. He hadn't known Robert would go as far as he did, but for the broader thing. For all the rooms where people like us are standing in civilian clothes while someone explains to us who we are. I should have said something earlier, he said, low enough that only I could hear. No, I said. You did exactly right, and I meant it. Because what Teller had done, sitting with his neutrality, giving me the choice, not outing me before I was ready. was a deeper form of respect than the standing ovation that was quietly assembling itself around us. Robert found his voice at some point. It came out differently than his voice usually sounds, slightly thinner. The confidence still there, but operating now on a narrower base. "Commander," he said. He tried the word carefully, like a man testing ice. "I wasn't. We didn't know you were." "I know," I said. Daniel never mentioned. Daniel didn't know everything. I looked at my husband when I said it. His face was very still, doing the thing it does when he is absorbing something large and choosing to feel it fully rather than deflect. I loved him for that. I have always loved him for that. There are things I couldn't share, classification, protocol. It wasn't about trust. Daniel nodded. "Once. Slow, we'll talk later," I said. He nodded again. The questions started after that. Carefully at first, this was still a dinner party. There were still social forms to observe, and then less carefully, as the champagne and the magnitude of the recalibration loosened the room's sense of what was appropriate. The councilman wanted to know about Whitmore. Okafor redirected him smoothly, without making it look like a redirect. A woman named Patricia, the real estate agent who had spent dinner telling me about the housing market, leaned across her table and said, "I had no idea," with the expression of someone who is genuinely sorry and also very aware of how they've been conducting themselves all evening. "Most people don't," I said, kindly, because kindness costs nothing and cruelty solves nothing, and I had learned that in places far harder than a garden party in Virginia. Brandon said nothing. I want to note that. In the midst of all the reconfiguration happening around the table, Brandon Hughes, who had mentioned filing, who had said for once, who had said you people, sat with his champagne flute and said absolutely nothing. His face had a quality I hadn't seen on it before. Not shame, exactly, not yet. Something that precedes shame. The moment when a person realizes that the story they've been telling about someone is not the story, and the gap between the two versions is much larger than they'd like. I didn't look at him long. There was someone else I needed to look at. I turned around. Lily was standing just behind my chair, her dark hair coming further loose from its braid. Her eyes, Daniel's eyes, gray-green, different in every light, moving between Admiral Okafor and Captain Teller, and me with an expression I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not confusion. Not the starstruck look children get around uniforms and titles. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, in a girl of 11, remarkably like recognition. Like she was seeing, for the first time, the outline of a person she had always somehow sensed was there. "Mom," she said. "Yeah. Bug, you never told me." I crouched down so we were eye level, right there in the middle of the garden, in front of 60 people and 2 senior military officers and my father-in-law's carefully recalculating face. "Some things," I said, "you tell people when the time is right." She considered this with the seriousness she gives to things that matter. "Is the time right now?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," I said. "I think it is." Lily wanted to know everything. That is the nature of 11-year-olds. They do not ease into things. They do not respect the social convention that says some moments need to breathe before they're examined. She took my hand and pulled me slightly away from the table, just far enough for a pocket of relative quiet near the rose garden, and she looked at me with those gray-green eyes and said, "Start from the beginning." I almost laughed. "The beginning is a very long way back," I said. "Then start from the middle." So I did. I gave her the version that a mother gives an 11-year-old. True in its outline, careful in its detail. I told her I had joined the Navy when I was 22. That I had trained for a long time in things I couldn't always name. That my job was to go into complicated places and try to make them less complicated. And that sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And the difference between those two outcomes was the thing I had spent 21 years learning to manage. She listened the way she listens to things she intends to remember. "The man," she said. "The old man. Admiral. What's his name?" "Okafor. Admiral Okafor. He knows you from work." "He was my commanding officer's commanding officer," I said, "a long time ago." And then later, I stopped. Later, he was involved in something I did. Something important, the hostages? She had heard that. Of course she had. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment, processing, then, were you scared? And I looked at my daughter, 11 years old, standing in her grandfather's rose garden with dahlia petals in her hair, asking me the question that reporters and debriefers and therapists had asked, and that I had always answered with the regulation answer: fear is a tool. You use it. You don't let it use you. And I thought, not her. Not this one. Yes, I said. I was scared every single day. She nodded slowly, as though this was more useful information than the other answer would have been. But you did it anyway, she said. That's the whole job, I said. That's the whole thing, Lily. You're scared and you do it anyway, and afterward you don't talk about it at dinner parties. She almost smiled. Why not? Because the people who need to know already know, and the people who don't, they're better off living in a world where they don't have to think about what it took. She looked at me for a long moment. That sounds lonely, she said. I squeezed her hand. It can be, I said. Yeah, it can be. We went back to the table. The party had reorganized itself in the way parties do after a seismic event. The surface continuing, the small social rituals of cake and coffee and good-natured toasting proceeding, while underneath, in the tectonic layer, everything was different. I could feel it in the way people looked at me now. Not the glazed-over look of polite disinterest I had cultivated over 11 years. Something more careful, more considered. Admiral Okafor had returned to his table, but his chair was angled toward ours now. Slightly unconsciously, the way people orient themselves toward things that matter. Captain Teller had stayed. He was talking to Daniel, quietly, the two of them slightly apart from the main conversation. And I watched my husband's face as he listened, the expressions moving through it. Surprise. Something like wonder. And underneath both of those, the complex emotion of a man realizing that the person he loves has been carrying weight he didn't know about, and trying to figure out whether he should feel left out or simply grateful she's still standing. I would talk to Daniel later. There was a lot to talk about. But first, there was something else. Okafor found a moment, between the coffee and the farewells beginning at other tables, to sit beside me. Not formally. He simply moved his chair to the adjacent space with the same unhurried deliberateness he did everything, and settled in, and looked at the rose garden. I hope I didn't overstep, he said. No, sir, I watched you sit through an hour of, he paused, chose his words. I watched you sit through an hour of that, and I want you to know I understand why you do it. The quiet, the cover. I've known operators like you, the best ones, the really exceptional ones. They make a choice about what to protect, and they stick to it past the point where most people would have broken. I looked at my hands. I almost broke tonight, I said. Before you spoke, I know, he said. That's why I spoke. We sat with that for a moment. Operation Nightfall, I said. How much do you remember? Enough. He was quiet for a moment. I remember the briefing when you brought them out. 11 people, a Dutch journalist, 3 aid workers, 2 American contractors, and 5 locals whose names never made any report because their government preferred to pretend the incident hadn't happened. He paused. I remember the after action. Your team was in theater for 71 hours. No close air support for the last 14 because of political complications I won't go into here. And you improvised. We improvised, I said, quietly. It was my team. It's always the team. You always say that. Because it's always true. He looked at me sideways. The team follows someone, Commander. And the someone you've been tonight. Sitting at that table. Not flinching. Protecting your family from the weight of what you carry. That someone is exactly the person I remember from the commendation. I didn't say anything. There are compliments that are too large to respond to gracefully. The only honest thing to do with them is hold them quietly and not let them change the shape of your face. But I need to tell you about the 72 hours. Because Okafor named it tonight and Teller knows it, and I could see in the way the table shifted that the name, Operation Nightfall, carried weight even to people who didn't know the details, And you deserve to understand why. It was October 2016. I was 33 years old. I had been a Navy commander for 8 months. We went in on a Tuesday. The hostages were being held in a compound outside a small coastal city. I won't name the city. That detail is still restricted, in conditions that the intelligence reports described clinically, and that the reality exceeded in every direction. 3 buildings, 12 armed guards on rotation, 1 point of water access, 2 generators. My team was 6 people, 4 men, 1 other woman, and me. We had a 72-hour window before the situation was going to escalate in a direction that would make extraction impossible. We had 1 asset inside who could get us through the first perimeter. We had no margin. I remember the smell of the coast the night we went in. Salt and diesel, and something burning somewhere in the middle distance. I remember the weight of my kit. I remember Petty Officer Marcus Webb. We called him Brick because of a joke that no longer matters, checking my vest in the dark and saying, very quietly, "You good, Ghost?" And I said, "I'm good." And we went. What happened in those 72 hours is not a story I will tell fully tonight. Not here, not at a garden party in Virginia, not because I'm protecting a classification, but because some things deserve to be held with more care than a dinner party allows. But I will tell you this, on 14. We had 11 people moving through terrain that did not want us to move through it. We had lost close air support 40 minutes earlier because of a political complication I had been told might happen and hoped wouldn't. We had 2 hostages who couldn't walk without assistance and 1 who was non-responsive and needed to be carried. And Brick looked at me in the dark, this big quiet man from Baton Rouge who had followed me into 4 countries and never once questioned a call, and said, "What do we do, Ghost?" I thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. And then I told him, we improvised. We did what trained people do when the plan runs out. We fell back on everything we knew, everything we'd practiced, every hour of preparation that looks like nothing until the moment it becomes everything. We brought all 11 people out. Brick carried the last one himself, the whole final kilometer, and didn't say a word about it. I have his photo on my desk at home. He was 29 years old in it, laughing at something off camera, his head thrown back, the way he laughed, total and uncomplicated. He is buried at Arlington now. He was not in Djibouti when he died. He was somewhere else, a different mission 2 years later. But he is in Arlington, and I visit when I can. And when I stand at his grave, I think about the dark on that coastline and his voice saying, "You good, Ghost?" And I think, I was good. I am still trying to be. I didn't plan to say it. That's the truth, and I want to be honest about it, because the version that makes me look better, the version where I had decided, calmly and deliberately, that tonight was the night, isn't accurate. I didn't decide. It happened the way certain things happen after you've held them too long. The container gives, not dramatically, not with a crash, but with the slow, quiet failure of something that has simply reached its limit. It started with Brandon's knee. I know that sounds small, but I've been trained to notice the details that precede the larger thing. And what I noticed, as the coffee was being cleared and the last of the cake disappeared, and the garden party began its slow gravitational collapse toward goodbye, was that Brandon's knee had started moving again. Under the table, the rhythmic, involuntary agitation of a man whose mind is working hard on something and whose body is reporting the effort. He hadn't spoken since Okafor stood up. Not one word. He had sat with his champagne, and then without it, and then with a cup of coffee he didn't drink, and the silence from him was so unlike him. So contrary to the Brandon Hughes I had known for 11 years, who filled every silence like a man allergic to empty air, that it was more conspicuous than anything he could have said. I watched the knee, and then Claire touched his arm, quietly. The way wives touch their husbands when they're trying to decide whether to intervene or let the moment pass. And Brandon looked at her, and something moved between them. A whole conversation in 3 seconds, the compressed language of people who have been married long enough to think in shorthand. And then he looked at me. "Pris," he said. His voice was different. The expansiveness was gone. What was left was smaller, and somehow more like an actual human being. Can I? He stopped, started again. I want to say something. Okay, I said. He looked at the table, at his hands. At some middle distance that I recognized, it's the place people look when they're trying to find the beginning of something they don't know how to begin. I didn't know, he said. Obviously, I didn't know any of what they said about you. What you did, he paused. But I want to be honest with you, because I think you've earned that much more than I've given you. The things I said tonight. And not just tonight, he stopped again. I've been a real ass to you for a long time. Yes, I said. You have. He looked up. He wasn't expecting that, the directness. People who operate from condescension rarely are. I'm sorry, he said. I looked at him for a moment, at the genuine discomfort on his face, at the effort it had cost him to get to 3 syllables. I appreciate that, I said. And then, because the container had given, and there was no putting it back, but I need to tell you something, Brandon, and I need you to hear it, not as an attack, as information you should have. His knee stopped moving. I had known for 5 years. The investigation report came through official channels. I won't say which ones. And I read it on a Tuesday afternoon in my office with the door closed and the blinds down, the way I read things that require my full attention and no witnesses. It was 73 pages. I read all of it twice. The finding was this: the compound location outside Djibouti, the one that had been known to our asset network and to my team alone, the one that should have been impossible to trace, had been compromised through a chain of disclosure that began at a private social event in the Washington, D.C. metro area approximately 6 weeks before the operation. An individual at that event, unnamed in the formal report but identified in the classified appendix, had disclosed, without malicious intent, that a family member was conducting intelligence work in the Horn of Africa region. Specifically, that she was in Djibouti. The individual had not known the significance of what they were saying. They had been, by all accounts, simply making conversation at a cocktail party, trying to sound interesting, the way people do. The person they said it to turned out to be the wrong person. 2 members of my team were killed in the ambush that followed 3 weeks later. Not in Djibouti, we had moved by then, but the same network that received that initial disclosure had been tracking us, and they found us again, and 2 people who should have come home didn't. Petty Officer 2nd Class Denise Carver, 26 years old. From Savannah, Georgia. She had a younger brother she was putting through community college, Staff Sergeant Roy Ito, 31, California. He had a daughter he'd never met. His wife was 8 months pregnant when he deployed. The individual named in the classified appendix was Brandon Hughes. I told him this the way I had learned to deliver the hardest information. Quietly, without accusation in my voice, because accusation is a form of performance, and this was not a performance. Factually, the way a report reads, because the facts were enough. They didn't need my anger to make them heavy. The garden had thinned. Most of the guests had moved inside or toward the front drive. The catering staff was folding tablecloths at the far end of the terrace. Admiral Okafor was still at his table. He had not left, I noticed, as though some instinct told him the evening was not finished. Captain Teller had gone inside with Daniel, who had needed, I think, some time with a man who could help him begin to process what this evening had taken apart and put back together. Robert was at the edge of the terrace talking to the councilman, or he had been. When I glanced up partway through what I was telling Brandon, Robert was no longer talking. He was standing very still, facing away from us, toward the darkened garden, and I understood that he could hear me. The terrace carries sound in the evening air. He had been listening for at least the last several minutes. I finished. Brandon sat with it for a long time. The knee was not moving now. His hands were flat on the table. His face had gone through several things while I was talking. Resistance first, the instinctive push against something that implicates you, and then something cracking in the resistance, and then underneath, raw and undefended, something that looked like a man genuinely encountering the weight of an action he had never known he'd taken. "I didn't know," he said. Finally, his voice was very low. "I know you didn't. I was just—" He stopped. "I was at a function. I was talking. I didn't think. I didn't know it would." "I know," I said. "2 people died." Yes, he put his face in his hands. Claire, beside him, had gone very still. She had heard it all. Her eyes were wet and she was not trying to hide it, which was, I thought, the most honest thing I had ever seen from her. "Why didn't you ever?" Brandon started, from behind his hands. "Because Daniel loves you," I said. "And Lily loves her uncle. And I made a decision a long time ago that protecting this family from that information was worth more than—" I stopped. "I'm not sure I made the right call. I've gone back and forth on it for 5 years. But it was a call I made, and I made it with what I had." He took his hands from his face. His eyes were red. Brandon Hughes, loud, expansive, lacrosse player-shaped Brandon Hughes, who had been performing ease and confidence at every family gathering for 11 years. Looked, for the first time since I'd known him, like his actual age. "I'm sorry," he said. "For those people. For what I said tonight. For all of it." I looked at him. I thought about Brick. About Denise Carver and her brother in Savannah. About Roy Ito's daughter, who was 5 years old now and had never known her father. "Okay," I said. "Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever, fully. But something that left the door ajar rather than slamming it. Because I have learned, in Djibouti and in other places and in this garden tonight, that closed doors cost more than open ones in the long run." Somewhere near the rose bushes, I heard Robert Hughes clear his throat. He did not turn around. Robert turned around eventually, not right away. He stood at the edge of the terrace for another 3 or 4 minutes after I finished speaking. Long enough that the councilman had excused himself. Long enough that the catering staff had finished with the far tables and moved inside. Long enough that the September night had fully arrived. And the garden lights had switched on automatically. Those warm amber fixtures Margaret had chosen because she said overhead lighting at dusk was unkind. He stood in the amber light with his back to us, and I watched him and I did not rush him. I have learned, in rooms far more pressurized than this terrace, that people need the time they need. You can hurry them past a realization, but you cannot hurry them through it. And the difference between those 2 outcomes is everything. When he turned, his face was different, not transformed. Not the face of a man who has been reborn, or broken, or whatever dramatic word fits the story someone else might tell about this moment. Just older. As though the last 20 minutes had added something to it that the previous 72 years hadn't gotten around to putting there yet. He looked at Brandon first. Brandon was still at the table. Still in the posture of a man who has been quietly demolished and is trying to figure out what comes next. Claire's hand was on his arm. He looked up when Robert turned, and something passed between them. Father and oldest son, that I was not meant to understand fully, and didn't try to. Then Robert looked at me. "Priscilla," he said, just my name. No tone attached to it. For the first time in 11 years, just the name, unfrighted. "Robert," I said. He came toward the table slowly, did not sit, stood at the edge of it, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair, and looked at me with the expression of a man assembling something in real time, searching for the right beginning the way you search for the edge piece of a puzzle you didn't know you were doing. "I owe you an apology," he said. His voice was steady. Robert Hughes has always had a steady voice. It is one of his defining qualities, the baritone confidence that has closed deals and silenced rooms and, for 11 years, reduced me to furniture. But the steadiness tonight was different. It wasn't performance. It was the controlled voice of a man who is afraid of losing control and is choosing, deliberately, not to. "You don't have to do this tonight," I said. "I think I do." He pulled out the chair. Sat. Looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "I've been the way I've spoken about you. To Daniel. At family events," he stopped. "I've been dismissive. I've been condescending. And I told myself it was because I didn't know you. That you were closed off. That you didn't let people in. That you'd made yourself a mystery and couldn't complain about being misread. He paused. But that's not why. No, I said gently. It's not. He looked at me. Why then? It wasn't quite a question. More like a man asking to hear the answer he already knows, from someone with the standing to say it. Because I didn't match the picture you had, I said, of what Daniel should have, what belonged in this family. I didn't have the right credentials, the right visibility, the right social legibility. And when someone doesn't fit the frame, it's easier to decide the problem is the person than the frame. Robert was quiet for a moment. That's accurate, he said. I know. I'm sorry, Priscilla. I looked at him. At 72 years of a very particular kind of man. Self-made, proud, genuinely loving in ways that had edges on them. Genuinely harmful in ways he had never examined. Not a villain. Just a person who had arranged his world around a set of assumptions he'd never had reason to question. Until tonight. I hear you, I said. Not it's okay. Not don't worry about it. Because it wasn't okay, and he should think about it. And the distance between acknowledging harm and erasing it is exactly the distance a person needs to cross on their own, without being let off early. But I heard him. That much was true. Daniel came back outside at 9:40. He came through the French doors with the careful step of a man who has been doing something difficult and is not quite finished with it. Teller must have given him a lot, or maybe not a lot, maybe just enough, the way good people give you exactly what you can hold. He looked across the terrace and found me at the table, and his face did the thing it does when he sees me after a separation, even a short one, the slight softening, the recalibration toward home. He sat beside me. Didn't say anything for a moment. Robert and Brandon had moved inside. Claire had gone with them. The terrace was nearly empty now. Just us. And Admiral Okafor at his table in the corner, who I was beginning to understand, was simply the kind of man who stays until things are resolved. Teller told me some things, Daniel said. I know he would have, not everything, he said. The rest was yours to tell. It is. Daniel looked at the garden, at the amber lights, on the rose bushes, the dahlias going dark at the edges in the evening air. He was quiet long enough that I could hear the crickets again, the same ones that had been there all evening, patient and continuous. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to answer honestly. Not the careful answer, the real one. Okay. Did you not tell me because you couldn't? Legally, classification? All of it? He paused. Or did you not tell me because you didn't think I could handle it? I looked at my husband, 11 years. He is a good man. He deserves the real answer, both, I said. At the beginning, mostly the first. Later, more of the second. Not because I think you're weak, Daniel. Because I love you in a way that made me want to keep you on the other side of it. The other side of what I know. What I've seen. What the work costs. I stopped. I thought I was protecting you. I'm not entirely sure I was right. He was quiet. You were carrying all of it alone, he said. That's the job. That's not just the job, he said. That's also a choice you made about us. About what to let me into. Yes, I said. It is, he nodded, slowly. The nod of a man who is hurt and knows he is hurt and is choosing not to make it about himself tonight, which is one of the things I love most about him. We're going to need to talk about that, he said. I know, not tonight. No, not tonight. He reached across the table and took my hand. Not dramatically. Just put his hand over mine the way he has done 10,000 times in 11 years, in the ordinary uncelebrated gesture of a person who has chosen you and keeps choosing you, even when the choosing is complicated. I turned my hand over and held his. Okafor came to us at 10 past 10. He had his jacket over one arm. Car keys in his other hand. He had the look of a man who is leaving because the important things have been said and he is too experienced to overstay a moment. He stood at the edge of the table. I want to say one more thing, he said, and then I'll let you have your evening. I waited. What you've done tonight, he said. The way you've handled this, the restraint, the years of it, and then what you said to your brother-in-law. The way you said it, he paused. In 32 years, I saw a lot of people in impossible positions. I don't give that word out easily. You handled an impossible position with more grace than most people manage in a controlled environment." I didn't say anything. "The Navy made a good call when they made you commander," he said. "And your family." He looked toward the house. "Your family is starting, I think, to understand why." He put on his jacket. "Good night, Commander Hughes." "Good night, Admiral." He walked across the terrace, through the side gate, and the sound of his car starting was the sound of the evening beginning, finally, to close. Daniel and I sat in the amber light. From inside the house, faintly, I could hear Lily's voice. She had found a second wind, the way children do when the adult world has shifted and they're trying to map the new terrain. Asking someone something. "Margaret, maybe?" Or Robert. The voice bright and unguarded and completely, perfectly alive. I closed my eyes for just a moment and let the quiet be quiet. The veterans came on a Wednesday, not planned, not orchestrated. I want to be clear about that because the version of this story that makes it looks like a coordinated demonstration, like someone made calls, like there was a meeting, like it was designed, is not the true version. What happened on that Wednesday was the result of a phone call Admiral Okafor made on Sunday evening to a man named Gerald Pruitt, who made a call of his own, which led to 2 more calls, which is how these things move through a certain community of people who have served together in places they don't discuss at dinner parties. It was 11 days after the anniversary celebration. In those 11 days, a great deal had happened that I will come back to. But first, the Wednesday, it was mid-morning. I was at home. I had taken personal leave, the first substantial leave I'd taken in 3 years, because there were things that needed attending to in my own house before I could be useful anywhere else. I was in the kitchen with coffee I hadn't drunk yet, looking at the backyard where Lily's bicycle was leaning against the fence, the way it had been leaning for 2 weeks because she kept meaning to bring it in and kept forgetting, and I was thinking about nothing in particular, which is something I have never been very good at and was attempting anyway. The doorbell rang at 10:15. I opened the door. There were 7 of them. Gerald Pruitt was in front. 71 years old, Vietnam-era Navy. A man Okafor had described to me once as the kind of person who shows up when it matters and doesn't explain why. He was wearing a button-down shirt and khaki trousers and a Vietnam veteran's cap that had seen considerable weather. Behind him, 6 more men and women, ranging from their late 50s to their mid-80s, in various configurations of civilian clothes and subtle insignia, a pin here, a patch there, the kind of identifiers that mean nothing to most people and everything to the right ones. I stood in the doorway. Gerald Pruitt looked at me. "Commander Hughes." He said, "Mr. Pruitt," I said, because Okafor had said his name and I hold names. He nodded. "Appreciated that. Frank Okafor called me, told me what happened last week, told me about Operation Nightfall." He paused. "Told me you'd been sitting quiet in a room with people who didn't know who you were for 11 years. I didn't say anything. We thought you should hear something," he said, "from people who do know, or who know enough." I brought them inside. I made more coffee. A lot more coffee. The industrial-sized pot Daniel had bought as a joke, and that I had come to rely on, and they settled into the living room with the ease of people who are comfortable in unfamiliar spaces because they have spent their lives making unfamiliar spaces workable. Gerald Pruitt took the armchair. The others arranged themselves on the couch and the dining chairs I pulled through, and the room had a quality I hadn't felt in it before, a particular density, like the air itself was aware of what had been lived by the people now breathing it. A woman named Sergeant Major Helen Voss, retired, Army, 67, 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, sat across from me and said, without preamble, "I heard you brought 11 people out in 72 hours without close air support for the last 14. "My team did," I said. "Your team followed you. That's what teams do." She looked at me steadily. "I led a team once. Fallujah, 2005. Lost 2 people in an ambush. Spent 3 years wondering what I should have done differently." She paused. "You know that feeling?" "Yes," I said. "I know that feeling." "Then you know that what your team did What you did doesn't stop belonging to you just because you don't talk about it at family parties. I looked at my coffee. I know, I said. Intellectually, I know. But, she said, but. I agreed. She nodded. That was enough. She understood the gap between knowing a thing and inhabiting it, the way you can be certain of something in your mind and still find it living in your chest as a question. Gerald Pruitt spoke for a while about his own service. Not to compare, he was careful about that the way people who understand the hierarchy of sacrifice are careful, but to establish a kind of common ground. He had come home from Vietnam to an airport where someone had spit on his uniform. He had spent 30 years building a life that didn't reference those years because the referencing was too costly, socially, psychologically, in ways that shifted over time but never disappeared entirely. What I want to say, he said eventually, settling his coffee cup on his knee, is that what those people in that room did to you, your father-in-law, your brother-in-law, that's not new. People have always found ways to diminish what they can't see. And the ones who do the work, the real work, we get two choices. We can spend ourselves trying to make them see. Or we can decide that their seeing or not seeing doesn't define the work. I know which choice you made, I said. Which? The second. Otherwise you wouldn't be here. You'd still be trying to make them see. He smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that has been through a lot and come out the other side of certainty about what matters. Yeah, he said. Took me about 20 years to get there. How long does it take? I asked. And I meant it as a real question. Not rhetorical, not conversational. He thought about it different for everyone, he said. But I'll tell you what helps. This, he gestured at the room. At the 7 of them, their coffee cups and their caps and their accumulated years. This helps. Being in a room where people already know, where you don't have to decide what to say or whether to say it. Where the silence is the same kind of silence, I looked around the room, Helen Voss, Gerald Pruitt, a man in the corner, Navy, late 70s, who hadn't said much but whose eyes had that quality of complete attention that I recognized from the best people I'd served with. 2 women near the window, one Army, one Marine, I could tell from the way they sat. The Marine's back straighter, by precisely the degree that Marine Corps training leaves you. Talking quietly to each other with the comfortable shorthand of people who have overlapping histories. I had not been in a room like this for a long time. I had been so busy protecting Daniel from the weight of my world that I had, without quite meaning to, stepped out of the community that understood it. The community where you don't have to translate, where it was the team is understood as the honest answer it is and not false modesty. Where the silence after certain names isn't awkward. It's correct. I've been alone in it, I said. The words came out simply, without drama, the way true things do when you've stopped managing them. Not, Daniel is good. He's been good. But I've been alone in the specific way you mean. We know, Gerald Pruitt said. That's why we came. They stayed for 2 hours. Lily came home from school at 3 and found 7 veterans in her living room, eating the last of the crackers I'd found in the pantry and arguing, with great warmth and absolutely no resolution, about the correct way to brew coffee in the field. She stood in the doorway with her backpack still on, taking in the scene with those gray-green eyes. Gerald Pruitt noticed her first. You must be Lily. How do you know my name? Your mom's famous, he said. In certain circles, Lily looked at me. I shrugged. Certain circles. She dropped her backpack on the floor, something I have asked her not to do 10,000 times, and came and sat beside me on the couch. She didn't ask to be introduced or explained to. She just sat and listened and watched the room with the attention of a girl who has decided she is interested in something and intends to understand it. Helen Voss. Across from us watched Lily for a moment. Then she looked at me. She's going to be something, she said. I looked at my daughter, at the straight spine and the careful eyes and the way she was already, at 11, learning to hold a room without performing for it. Yeah, I said. She is. The apology from Robert came on a Saturday, not the terrace apology. That had been the beginning of something, not the thing itself. What came on that Saturday, 3 weeks after the anniversary party, was different in the way that a rough draft is different from a finished letter. The terrace version had been assembled under pressure in the immediate aftermath of recalibration while the room was still ringing. This one had been thought about, written down, I think, and then not read from, because Robert Hughes is too proud to read from a piece of paper when he's talking to someone, but written down first anyway, because some things need the discipline of the page before they can survive the air. He called Daniel on a Friday and asked if he could come by Saturday morning. Daniel told me. Asked if I was okay with it. Yes, I said. You don't have to see him if you don't want to. I know. I folded the dish towel I was holding. I want to. He came at 10. Lily was at a friend's house. Daniel made coffee and then, with the particular sensitivity he has developed over 11 years of reading rooms he only partially understands, said he had some things to check in the study and disappeared, which left Robert and me at the kitchen table with 2 mugs and the Saturday morning light coming through the window over the sink, the ordinary domestic light that doesn't soften anything and doesn't need to. Robert looked tired, not unwell. He is a vigorous man, constitutionally, but the kind of tired that comes from interior work, from spending 3 weeks taking apart something you built over decades and looking at each piece and asking yourself honest questions about it. That kind of tired is the most legitimate kind. It means something real happened. He wrapped both hands around his mug. I've been thinking, he said, about what I've cost you. I waited, not just the things I said, those too, but what it cost you to sit in our family for Lev being able to without anyone seeing. He stopped. Tried again. I built my whole life on the idea that visible work is real work, that what you can point to, what you can show people, what translates into something legible in a room, that's what matters. That's how I measured Daniel. That's how I measured you. He looked at the table. That's a very limited way to measure people. It is, I said. I missed you, he said. And then quickly, because the word surprised him coming out. I misread you. For years. I had an idea of who you were, and I didn't. I never questioned it. Even when Daniel was happy. Even when Lily was thriving. Even when the evidence in front of me was that my son had made a good life with a good person, he shook his head. I kept choosing the idea over the evidence. Why? I asked. He looked at me. It was a direct question, and he owed me a direct answer, and he seemed to know it. Because you didn't need my approval, he said. And that, he stopped. A long pause. That unsettled me. Most people want something from me. Validation. A piece of what I've built. A piece of what any of it. You were always just. Complete. Somewhere else. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I decided it meant something was missing in you. I held my coffee cup. Outside the window, a bird was doing something complicated in the maple tree. I watched it for a second. What was actually missing, I said, was my ability to tell you who I was. Not because I didn't want to. Because I couldn't. And then, over time, because I'd decided it wasn't worth the cost. I made it not worth the cost, he said. Yes, he nodded. Receive that. I'm sorry, Priscilla. He said, my full name the way Okafor had said it. Clean, without the faint note of mild disappointment that had always lived in it before. For the years of it. Not just the night of the party. The years. I looked at my father-in-law, 72 years old, self-made, proud. A man who loves his son in the only shape he knew how to love him until 3 weeks ago started expanding that shape. Not a villain. Never a villain. Just a person who had been wrong for a long time in ways that had real costs, and who was now, at 72, doing the harder and less glamorous work of knowing it. I hear you, I said again, the same words as the terrace. But different now with 3 weeks between them and a Saturday morning and the bird in the maple tree. Less provisional, more real. He nodded, drank his coffee. We sat for a while, not performing anything, just sitting. Tell me something, he said eventually. You don't have to, but the operation, the one Okafor mentioned, is there anything you can tell me about it? I looked at him. Why? Because I want to understand what I dismissed, he said. What I made invisible. I want to understand what was actually there. So I told him a version, not classified, not the 72 hours in full detail, but the shape of it, the weight of a decision made in the dark with lives on the other side of it, the sound of Brick's voice, the last kilometer, the feeling of coming out the other side of something that had no right to end as well as it did. He listened without interrupting, which is not something Robert Hughes does naturally, and the effort of it was visible, and I respected the effort. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The man you mentioned," he said, "Brick. He was my team, my people, the best of them, and he's gone now." "Yes." Robert was quiet. He looked at the table, at his hands, the hands of a man who has built things, physical things, structures that would still be standing in 100 years. I watched him sit with the particular weight of understanding what it means to build something that doesn't have a blueprint, that you can't point to, that exists only in the surviving people and the living people and the space between them. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Thank you for asking," I said. Brandon came separately, 2 days later. His was harder. Not because Robert's had been easy, it hadn't, but because Brandon's had more in it, more to account for. The years of small cuts were in it, but the other thing was in it too, the bigger thing, the thing I had told him on the terrace. And that thing doesn't resolve in 3 weeks. Maybe it never fully resolves. Maybe the most honest thing I can say about it is that it becomes something you carry differently over time. Something that shifts from the front of your body to the side of it, where you're still aware of it, but it's not the first thing you feel every morning. He sat across from me in that same kitchen. He didn't have a speech prepared. He came in and sat down and looked at me and said, "I've been thinking about Denise Carver." I went very still. "I looked her up," he said. "I found her name through, I don't know, some public record, a memorial page. She was 26. Yes, she had a brother, Marcus. He was 19 when she died. She was paying his tuition." Brandon's jaw moved, and Roy Ito, he said. "His daughter's name is Keiko. She's 5. He put his hands flat on the table. He was not going to cry. Brandon Hughes does not cry easily. It is one of his constitutive features. But something in his face was working very hard to stay composed. "I know I said I was sorry," he said, "on the terrace. But he stopped. I needed to say it again. After knowing their names, after understanding what my carelessness cost, he looked at me directly, the most direct look he has ever given me. "I'm sorry, Priscilla. For Denise, for Roy. For all of it." I looked at my brother-in-law. "I know," I said. "What do I do with it?" he asked, genuinely, not rhetorically. The question of a man who has encountered something too large for the tools he has. I thought about Gerald Pruitt. About 20 years, finding the second choice. "You carry it carefully," I said. "And you don't waste the carrying. You make it mean something in how you move forward." I paused. "That's all any of us can do with the weight we have." He nodded. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't the clean ending of a story that wants to be neat. It was 2 people sitting in a kitchen with the complicated truth between them and choosing, for now, to stay at the table. That, I have learned, is sometimes the most important choice. A year goes by the way years go. Not all at once, not in the dramatic sweep that stories sometimes compress them into, but in the accumulation of ordinary days that don't announce themselves as significant and turn out, looking back, to have been the whole thing. September became October. October became the particular quality of Virginia November. The light going low and amber in a way that has always made me feel, simultaneously, the pulse of somewhere to be and the satisfaction of being already there. Daniel and I talked, really talked. The long conversations that had been waiting for years, behind the careful management of what I shared and didn't share. Some of those conversations were hard. Some of them were the most honest I've had in my adult life. We came out the other side of them not unchanged. I want to be clear about that. We are not the same people who stood in the garden in September, but intact, and maybe more than intact. Maybe something that doesn't have a clean word but feels, in the body, like ground that has been turned over and replanted. It grows differently after that. Messier. More alive, Lily turned 12 in February. She asked for, among other things, books about the history of U.S. naval intelligence operations. Not because I suggested it. I didn't. She found her way there herself through some combination of the Wednesday afternoon with Gerald Pruitt's group and her own quietly relentless curiosity about the shape of the world. I ordered the books without comment, watched her read them at the kitchen table with the focused attention she gives to things she intends to understand, not just know. One evening in March, she looked up from one of them and said, without preamble, Mom, "Did you actually like it? The work?" I thought about that. "Yes," I said, "most of it. The parts that mattered. Yes, even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts," I said. "The hard parts were where it was real." She went back to her book. But she was smiling slightly, the smile she gets when information confirms something she already suspected. I made a note to myself, not written down anywhere, just held. This one is going to do something with her life that I won't fully understand and will be completely proud of. Robert changed slowly. That is the honest way to say it. He did not undergo a conversion. He did not become a different man overnight or even over months. What he did was something quieter and, I think, more durable. He started asking questions instead of making pronouncements. At Christmas, the first one after the party, he sat beside me at dinner and asked about my work with the seriousness of a man who has decided something is worth his serious attention. Not all the details. He understood there were details I couldn't share, but the shape of it, the decisions, the weight of command. I told him what I could. He listened the way he'd listened in the kitchen that Saturday, with effort, with genuine attention. And at one point he said, quietly, so only I could hear, "Daniel chose better than I gave him credit for." "Daniel always knew," I said. "He did," Robert said. "I'm the one who didn't. It was not the last difficult moment between us. It won't be. We are too different, fundamentally, in how we move through the world, for the path to be smooth all the way. But it is honest now. There is ground under it. And ground, even complicated ground, is better than the air we were standing on before." Brandon did something I didn't expect. In January, he contacted the family of Denise Carver. I found out not from him, but from Marcus Carver, Denise's younger brother, who sent me a message through a channel I won't specify, saying that a man named Brandon Hughes had reached out, had explained that he had a connection to Denise's case that he needed to be accountable for, and had asked if there was anything the family needed. Marcus wrote that they didn't need anything from Brandon specifically, but that they appreciated being remembered, that Denise's name being spoken by someone new, someone outside the usual circles of remembrance, had meant something to their mother. I read that message 3 times. I didn't tell Brandon I'd received it. It wasn't mine to acknowledge. What he had done for the right reasons and not for my approval. And that distinction matters. That's the difference between guilt and accountability. Guilt circles back to the person feeling it. Accountability moves outward, toward the people who were actually hurt. He was learning, slowly, imperfectly, in the way all real learning happens. I will take it. I went to Arlington in April. It was a Tuesday. Cool morning, the cherry trees just past peak, the petals coming down in the light wind the way they do, drifting across the white stones with complete indifference to the weight of what's beneath them. I went to Brick's grave first. I always do. And I stood there for a while with my hands in my jacket pockets, not praying exactly, not talking exactly, just being present in the way that feels most honest. Then I went to Denise. Her stone is in a section I hadn't visited before. White marble, her name and dates and designation, the same as all the others and entirely individual. I stood there a long time. I thought about the airport in Djibouti, the morning after we came out, the 11 people we'd brought back, disheveled and dehydrated and alive, being met by officials and medical personnel and, in the case of the Dutch journalist, a colleague who had been waiting 3 days and wept without embarrassment when he saw her. I had stood to the side, Brick beside me, both of us still in our operational kit, watching the reunions happen, And he had said so quietly I almost didn't hear it. That's the whole job right there. That's the whole job. I put my hand on Denise Carver's stone. I'm sorry I couldn't bring you home, I said, out loud. The way I've learned to do things out loud that I used to only think, because the spoken version costs more and is therefore more honest. I'm sorry, and I remember you, and your brother is going to be okay. The wind moved through the cherry trees. I stood there until I was ready to leave, and then I left. There is one more thing. People have asked me, since the anniversary party, carefully, in the circuitous way people ask things they're not sure they're entitled to ask, what the call sign means, ghost, why they called me that, whether it was about invisibility, about moving without being seen, about the particular skill of disappearing into a room full of people who don't know what they're looking at. It was all of those things. Technically, operationally, all of those things are accurate. But there's another version, the one I've come to understand better in the year, since a man stood up at a dinner table in Virginia and said my call sign out loud in front of my family. They didn't call me Ghost because I was invisible. They called me Ghost because I went into places where people had already given up, where the situation had been assessed, the resources calculated, the odds declared unfavorable, and I found the ones who were still alive, and I brought them back out. That is what a ghost does if you think about it differently. Not haunt, not disappear, but return. Come back from places others didn't. I have been doing that my whole life. In theaters of operation that don't appear on any civilian map, in a family that didn't know what it had, in a marriage that needed to become more honest than it was, in my own understanding of what I am and what I've done and what it was worth. I keep coming back. That is the whole job. That is, maybe, the whole thing, wherever you are right now, whatever room you're in, whatever weight you're carrying quietly. I hope you know that the unseen work is still work, that the strength no one witnesses is still strength, and that the people who have served, in whatever form that serving took, deserve to be known, not performed for, not displayed, just known. Share this with someone who understands that, or someone who needs to.